Right? Welcome, everybody. Appreciate you coming tonight. You have come to Epic Fail, Was Darwin Wrong? And tonight's presentation is Was Darwin Wrong? So-called Proofs of Evolution Fail. So we have a 4-part series. We had our first part last night, which was Blind Chance or Grand Design in this room. Tonight, as I just stated, is a different presentation. And then we have 2 more presentations after tonight. We have tomorrow night, which Dave and Mary Jo may talk about. If not, if you're still here, I'll talk to you at the end, reminding you of that presentation. And then that's here in this room as well. And then on Saturday, we have our last presentation at our church. So I'm Parnell Mahoney. Is it kind of ringing a little bit?
Yeah.
We could fix it. Do you want to fix it?
A little loud.
Oh, you don't know how to. That's cool. Just turn it down a little bit. Can you guys still hear? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm Pastor Parnell Mahoney with Maranatha Christian Church. We're a campus church here. And the sponsors of this event tonight are Maranatha Christian Fellowship and International Student Outreach. And just a little bit about our contact table, or over here, our information table. We have a sign-up sheet, and we have flyers about our church event. We worship once a week, and we also have a weekly Bible study. So it's called a Dinner Bible Fellowship. Who likes the Dinner Bible Fellowship? Raise your hand. Yeah, come on. So a lot of us participate, and we have it in our homes once a week, and we kind of alternate homes, and it's about 2 hours long. It's for disciples of Christ or seekers, people that are open, and it's really good community building and truth encouraging time. So that's something that we have. I don't have a flyer on that, but if you sign up or if you want to talk about it, ask me, or you'll find out more. And we have other exciting things. And if you sign up, we'll send you information. We won't harass you very much. So there are flyers of this event tonight and the other events, the other presentations in the series on the table. So if you want that information on your way out, grab it in case you're not aware of it. So a little bit about why we're doing this presentation. We're a Christian organization, and in my case, my story is that I came to Christ as a junior here at the University of Minnesota. I'm 43 now, but I was 19 years old, and I started meeting with someone. We started doing a Bible study, and I got hope. I got hope from that Bible study. You know, I thought, oh, this sounds pretty good. This Jesus guy sounds pretty cool. You know, and I thought, is he real though? And well, I just maintained that hope for a number of Bible studies. My faith was kind of growing, but I wasn't sure. And then I met Jesus in my apartment one night here on campus. I didn't see him, but I met him. He was there. And he led me to salvation. I received him as my Lord and Savior. And yeah, the rest is history. My life changed. And all of a sudden I could hear God's voice. My heart was changed. I just had a new desire. I had a relationship with him. And as a result of that, I thought, well, this is amazing. Jesus is real. You know, I mean, I believed he was real the night I received him. You don't give Jesus a try if you accept him. You believe he's there. You believe he's the Savior. But I mean, he came alive after that in my life. And so as a result of that, I thought, well, I discovered Jesus through the Bible. So then I'm going to believe everything the Bible says. You know, so I started reading the whole Bible for myself. I started in Genesis, and that's where I started getting in trouble, right? Because God tells about how he created the world supernaturally, and I had to deal with that. And I thought, there's a conflict here between what I've learned for 19 years in school and what this Bible's saying. And so that's a motivation for this subject. We want to, for one thing, help Christians believe their Bible. But for another thing, for people that are open to the possibility that there could be evidence for a creator, for this world being created, for the Bible being true. We're excited to present that information. We think it's compelling. So that's a little bit about this presentation. Also, we believe the Bible is revealed history. So God has given us revelation of real historical origins of this universe, of this planet, of human beings, animals, plants, everything. He tells us exactly how he did it. And our Christian faith is based on history. And so is it still ringing? So it says in 1 Corinthians 15:17, a little part of that verse. It says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. So if our faith is not based on history, if our faith can be disproven historically, then we might as well go back to the bar. I'm not here to just follow legends and feel good. I'm here for something real. So we believe the Bible's real. We believe there's good evidence for it. And if you think you can prove it otherwise, come talk to me. Not that I want to be persuaded otherwise, but I'd love to tell you about my Jesus. So anyway, the Bible tells us, I'm almost done here. So I know you came for something else, but the Bible tells us that there was a creation event, special creation, right? And then it tells us that man was originally created perfect, but fell from that place of perfection, that place of access and communion with God, into rebellion through one action, one disobedience. There's only one command God gave man, and he disobeyed that command. And so we took on sinful nature. We took on death. This whole world began dying. Everything began dying. And then there was a great flood. God was so mad with all the sin that came about, all the corruption on the earth, all the violence and evil, that he flooded the whole world. And then after that, the Savior came as in the form of a man. He taught us the way of salvation. He lived a perfect life. He died on a Roman cross, crucified in our place, lived a sinless life. So his sacrifice paid for our sin, right? And if we believe that, we can be saved. If we believe he is the Savior and he did rise from the dead. So we're talking about eternity, salvation. And we just figured that if God couldn't get the first book of the Bible right, how can we trust him for the rest? And I think some Christians think, you can have two spheres, right? You can have, I believe in evolution over here, and I believe Jesus over here. And I'm just not I don't need to figure out how they mix, and that's fine. I'm not saying you can't be Christian and believe that, but I think a lot of people have walked away from Christianity because they thought, if God is true, how can there be this clash, So we're here to say there doesn't have to be a conflict for you. The Bible's true. I hope you're convinced by the evidence, the scientific evidence that's going to be presented tonight. Presentation is going to be about an hour and 15 minutes. We're going to have a Q&A following, and please hold your questions till the end. And then once we get started with that, we'll kind of lay some ground rules. If we have a dynamic Q&A, that's great. Love all the questions, even the hard ones from the skeptics. A little bit about our speakers. Dave and Mary Jo Nutting are the founders of Alpha Omega Institute and the directors of it. It's a creation science teaching ministry. They've been doing it for 40 years. And Mary Jo and Dave enjoy hiking. Mary Jo enjoys time with her grandkids, and Dave he's an avid fisherman. So that's kind of a little bit about them. They were former evolutionists, and then they were convinced by the scientific evidence to change and become creationists. And they have a story there. It's not just, a nice rhetoric. So if you're curious, maybe they'll tell you about the story. I don't know. I think they will. They have advanced degrees in mathematics and geology for Dave, and biology with a science education emphasis for Mary Jo. And both have taught at the high school and the college level, including they've taught evolution. And Mary Jo's going to start, and then halfway through, Dave's going to join in. I was wondering where you were, Dave. You're hiding back there. Was I embarrassing you? Talking about Jesus, science. It's not science. So anyway, without further ado, Mary Jo Nutting, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. So, creation or evolution. I grew up going to church and believing the Bible, and I thought creation was true, but I also went to school. And at school, I learned evolution. And it was presented to me as if it was a proven scientific fact. They might have called it a theory, but it was always presented as if it was the only theory, as if it was proven. And so I ended up believing in evolution too. And I didn't know what to do with these two very distinct, I thought, models of origins. And so in high school, I just drew a big line down the middle. At church, I believed in creation. And when I was at school, I believed in evolution. I thought evolution was the scientific explanation for the origin of life and everything else in the universe. And I thought that creation was the religious explanation. And they just never met. And then I went to a church college. And at the church college, they told me, well, you can take and put the two together. They said Genesis is a myth. It was written for primitive people who couldn't understand the science of evolution. They said those days in Genesis 1, they're really not days, they're periods of time, millions of years long. And somehow God used evolution as his method of creating. I thought, oh, that's good, right? The wall can come down. I can have creation, I can have evolution. God used evolution. That seemed to make sense to me. I went from that church college to a secular university. In fact, I ended up going to what was Mankato State College at the time. And, you know, every place I went, they taught evolution. All my science classes taught evolution. It was never doubted. It was always presented as if it was true. Eventually, I graduated from Colorado State University in Colorado, Fort Collins, Colorado, had a degree in biology. And so went on to teach biology, and what could I teach? You know, if the book taught evolution, I taught it too, because I thought it was proven. That's what I thought from what I'd been taught in school. And then we ended up going to Alaska. I'm teaching at a small church college in Alaska. And while we were in Alaska, one day I went shopping in a little secondhand store, and I found a little book that was called Evolution, The Fossils Say No, by Dr. Duane Gish, just tiny little book. I bought it for 5 cents. But when I read that book, I went, wow, I thought the fossils proved evolution. I thought they were the best evidence of evolution. And yet Dr. Gish was saying, no, they don't prove evolution. In fact, they're a problem for evolution. I gave that book to Dave to read. He had more background in geology and paleontology than I did. And after he read it, we said, this guy's either crazy, nuts, or maybe he knows something we don't know. And so at that point, we began to study for ourselves what the evidence really said, not just what was being taught in the schools and so on. And after a time, you might say we evolved from evolutionists to creationists. It didn't take millions of years, but it did take a little bit of study time, you know, as we were reevaluating things. And after that, you know, we just started studying. We were very, very excited to find evidence that would support what the scripture had to say. Now, we're not trying to prove the Bible true by science, but what we do want to do is take a look at an alternative explanation of the origin of the universe, the origin of life, and the development of life on Earth from a different perspective, from a different worldview, you might say. So tonight, what we want to do is look at some of the so-called proofs of evolution, the things that are ordinarily taught in biology classes and, you know, on TV and the museums and so on. And obviously we can only just barely touch on that tonight, but we'll hit on some of that tonight. And then Dave will talk about fossils a little bit later, because they really are the only hard facts that you can look at really and get your hands on. So was Darwin wrong? Well, first of all, what do we mean by these two different models, creation and evolution? Creation, we would say, involves a supernatural creator. As this creator is outside of nature itself, where evolution says everything came about by natural processes over time and chance and so on. And you're very familiar with the evolution model, I'm sure, if you've been to school. A lot of people think that creation is just a religious myth, but evolution is science. That's what I used to think, as I told you. But really, both of these ideas have a religious aspect to them. Both of them require faith, because none of us was there at the beginning. And so somehow we have to put our faith someplace, whether it's in science or whether it's in what we believe to be true about science, or whether it's in this book that Punnett talks about, right? The Bible, the history book. And so we can look at those things, but both require faith in the end. What's the faith of evolution? Evolution requires faith in time and chance and natural processes. Just that nature alone can cause the diversity of life that we see on the earth today. Creation, of course, requires faith in a supernatural creator, someone who's outside of this world system, you might say. So we say evolution is a belief. It's a philosophy, and actually evolution is a philosophy posing as science. Everybody thinks, or most people think, evolution is science, and yet evolution is really just a belief system. It's a philosophy, and it is a pillar of the worldview that is called naturalism or materialism, which basically says nature is all there is. And we can explain everything on the basis of the nature. Well, your worldview can affect your interpretation of the data. And this is very important that you understand then what is your worldview and how have you gained that worldview? What, where's it come from? You might think of your worldview as colored glasses. If you put on red glasses and you look at a white wall, it's going to look red, right? If you put on blue glasses, it's going to look blue. And so our worldview colors the way we look at things. And so that's probably why you can take two very good scientists looking at the very same data and coming up with very differing conclusions. One of them might go, wow, isn't evolution wonderful? And somebody else might say, that just indicates a powerful, awesome creator. But it depends on what your worldview is. If you already think that everything, you have to be able to explain everything without a supernatural, then that forces your interpretation of the data into some sort of naturalistic interpretation. So this debate really is not over the data itself, but over the interpretation of the data. If I have a rock, I can measure that rock, I can weigh that rock, I can grind it all up and figure out what chemicals it has in it. We can get all kinds of data about that rock, but that data should be the same for an evolutionist as a creationist. But then the question comes, how did that rock get there? What was the origin of that rock and so on. Now we're outside of looking directly at data. And so we're going to interpret the data then. Well, tonight what we want to do is look at just 4 broad categories of supposed evidences of evolution. And the first one is just change, because evolution simply means change, doesn't it? So we need to get a little more detail there. We need to say, well, what kind of change and how much change are we talking about? Are we talking about the idea of mega evolution, that molecules can change into man given enough time, natural processes over millions and millions and millions of years? Or are we talking maybe about macroevolution, which describes the origin of new types of organs and organisms? For example, the fish to the amphibian transition, or amphibians to reptiles and so on, apes and monkeys on up to humans. Or are we talking simply about changes or adaptations within a basic type or kind of creature? We might call that microevolution, or we might call that adaptation. We might call it variation within a created kind in the creation model. And basically what it says is dogs are dogs are dogs. We can get all sorts of varieties of dogs, but they're still dogs. And they can interbreed with one another, the wolf and the domestic dog, and we can interbreed them together and get all sorts of variations of dogs, coyote dog or coyote with a wolf and so on. We might call that a created kind then, if they can interbreed between themselves, like in the dog kind. Lots of variation in the dogs. So microevolution or adaptation or variation within a kind. Now it's my contention that most all of the evidence that's given in biology for evolution is just simply this kind of change, this kind of variation within the basic type. And we'll take a look at that. We're going to look at some of the common evidences of evolution, like Darwin's famous finches. When Darwin went to the Galapagos Islands, he looked at these finches. They had different shapes and sizes of beaks. Body shapes were a little different. And he supposed that they had all come from a common ancestral pair of finches that had flown over from South America, and that diversification had taken place since that time. But the question is this evidence of evolution? I'd say it fits perhaps with the idea of evolution, but it also fits with the idea of creation. And so we look at it and we go, what is the evidence? Let's take a look at it. What do you start with here? You start with finches, right? And what do you end up with? Finches, nothing fundamentally different, nothing fundamentally new. Change, variation within that finch type, just like we saw within the dogs, variation within the dog type. We're seeing here variation within the finch type. And so to me, that's not really evidence of evolution. it is evidence of some variation within that kind. Interestingly enough, modern research on these finches has shown that these differing beak sizes seem to be related to environmental changes over time, just broad changes. So if we have a series of wet years, we might get a predominance of one type of beak. And if we have a period of drought over a period of time, you might have more of the finches born with a different kind of a beak. But it flips back and forth and back and forth. So that's really not evolution. That's really just variation within that created kind. Maybe some of this is due to epigenetics. Epigenetics is a more recent area of study within genetics within the last probably 10 to 15 years, something like that. It's been really becoming a little more known. Epigenetics says it really explains something that for years I had questions about. I knew about the genetics and the DNA and so on, and how the DNA controls heredity and so on, but it was always a mystery. How does the DNA interact with the environment? Because things do change and adapt in order to adapt to differing environments. I'm thinking perhaps that epigenetics is involved in some of this change. Here's a quote from Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins. He is a creation scientist. He says, scientists have discovered that the genes are very similar among the various species. They discovered that epigenetics correlated closely with the beak shape and size among species. Epigenetic mechanisms clearly remain a major player in adaptation. Epigenetics is really, the DNA doesn't change itself, but there's little chemical tags that get put onto the DNA molecule that will influence the way that the genes are expressed. They might be something to help know when to turn it on, when to turn it off, which ones are turned on and off, and so on. And so it's a new area of study, really. But it really explains a lot, I think. But it's not evolution. It's showing how we can get variation within those created kinds. What about this one? Evidence of peppered moss. This is one of the classic evidences of evolution. In fact, I had a student down at the University of Mankato just last week. And he says, oh, I used to be a believer. I used to be a Christian, but now I'm an agnostic. And I asked him why. He said, well, I wanted to follow the science. And so I asked him, well, give me some evidence. And the first thing he said was moths. Well, think about these moths. These moths were around in Great Britain before the Industrial Revolution. And the idea was that there were some dark moths and some light moths. It seemed like there were more light ones than dark ones because they tell you the trees were light colored. There was not a lot of pollution in the air. And so the light colored moths were better camouflaged on the tree trunks and so on. Then they tell you they started burning coal in Great Britain, polluted the air. The tree bark became dark. And after a while, there were more dark moths than light ones. That's how that story goes. Well, is that really true, first of all? And if it is true, does it really prove evolution? Well, let's stop and think about it. What do we start out with? Moths, right? Light ones and dark ones. What do we end up with? Moths, light ones and dark ones. Nothing fundamentally new, just the same kinds of moths. And so we can take a little more, look at that a little more in depth. And as we study it, they've found out that these moths do not even naturally rest on the tree trunks. They normally are nocturnal, so they're flying around at night. During the day, they're up in the leaves and the tops of the trees. They don't normally rest on the trunks of the trees. They actually had to stick them on that tree trunk in order to get the pictures that are classic in the textbooks. This may just be a bogus example. There's a lot of research going on that's saying it's now called a myth. Jonathan Wells exposed it in his book, The Icons of Evolution, Science or Myth, and he's claiming that this is a myth, the idea of peppered moths. And then in the Journal of Evolutionary Biology, 2012 confirmed pretty much what Jonathan Wells was saying about it. So it's sad to me, though, that things like this that are a piece of evidence, they seem to be able to be interpreted in an evolutionary way until you dig deeper into it. But many times those are the kinds of things that not Christian students offer their faith, or that keep others from even considering the Christian faith. And so we would like to, show a little more of that evidence. What about antibiotic resistant bacteria? That's another big one. And people will say, certainly that proves evolution, doesn't it? You look at these bacteria, and they seem to evolve and change and mutate and be able to become resistant to antibiotics. Isn't that evolution? Well, again, it depends on your definition of evolution, doesn't it? And so I would say, at least let's look at it. Let's say, what do we start out with? We start out with bacteria. What do we end up with? Bacteria, the very same kinds of bacteria. So they're not changing into anything different, but you're just seeing a little bit of variation within those bacteria type. And so if you take a population of bacteria and you're doing an experiment, you've got a petri dish growing bacteria, you throw some antibiotic on it, what happens? Well, a lot of them would die probably, but maybe a few would live that were already had that ability to resist that antibiotic. And then that population as a whole could become resistant to that antibiotic. And we see that happening. I mean, it's a big problem in medicine today, because we're seeing these bacteria that are becoming very resistant to certain kinds of antibiotics. And so we know that it happens. But the question again is, does that distinguish between evolution and creation? It really doesn't, because either one of them, what we're explaining is variations, small variations within a created kind, not one thing changing into another kind of thing. So we could say we see a lot of variation, yes, but not evolution. At least we're not seeing evolution from one kind of thing to another kind of thing here. So if anything, this would be an example of microevolution, not macro or mega evolution. What about within the human population? We see lots of variation in skin colors and some other characteristics among human beings. Does that prove evolution? I mean, the Bible tells us we get all the humans on the earth came from an original pair of human beings, just a man and a woman from the very beginning. How would we get all the skin colors if that was true? How do we get all the variation that we see? Well, we can show you with just a simple Punnett square how you could start with two parents with medium skin color, and you can get all the way from lightest light to darkest dark skin color in one generation if you start with the right combination of genes. And so somebody with medium skin color here, I don't know if this thing works, does it? Yep, there it does. You can see up here, it has to do with dominance. So here we've got two dominant genes from the mother maybe, and two dominant genes from the father. And so in the child, everything is dominant. And in that case, it correlates with very dark skin. We look down in this corner, we've got recessive genes coming from both parents. And so we have very light colored skin. And then we can get everything in between from two parents. Could happen in one generation, given the right color of skin to start with. And so this idea of it takes millions of years for the various races to develop really isn't true. Darwin thought that there were different lines of apes and monkeys that had evolved into the different races, different human races. And actually, we had some of our speakers that had gone into Africa, and we're speaking to a bunch of pastors down there. And these pastors came up and asked our speakers to say, which line of apes and monkeys did we come from? It's different from what you came from. And when they were able to show them this, that we really are all one, we're all related. We all have the same parents, basically, Adam and Eve, way back in the beginning. When they showed them that, they got really excited because they had been told for so many years that because of their skin color, they were less evolved and they were less valued than the white people in that area. Travesty, a real travesty. And it was based on what? Well, misunderstanding of science, and also a lot of prejudice and so on. So we can show you, though, if we can get all the way from lightest light to darkest dark in one generation. This is one family. These are the biological parents, and there are the little twin girls, very different looking, aren't they? very different skin colors. It shows them growing up a little bit. One family, genetically it works. Science Magazine 2017 had this article, How Africans Evolved a Palette of Skin Tones. And it says that Tishkoff, the researchers team, found the story of skin color evolution isn't so black and white. It says the study adds to established research undercutting old notions of race. You can't use skin color to classify humans. Interesting, huh? There is so much diversity in Africans that there is no such thing as an African race, according to these researchers. And so they're just showing that genetically, there's a lot of different, there's a lot of variation that's built right in there. Nathaniel Jensen, in the book Replacing Darwin, looks at mutation plus natural selection, but it also talks about built-in variation that was there from the time of creation, that the creator built right in to organisms a lot of genetic diversity. And so we can see that if we were to combine those ideas and demonstrate them using this Punnett square. How many of you have seen Punnett squares before? Some of you love them, some of you hated them, right? But they're pretty neat. But what it shows is here, if you have this combination and two people with that kind of combination of genes get together and have kids, all their children would be dark. If they were down here, all their children would be very light. And if they were somewhere in between, you're going to get all sorts of variations of medium skin color. Well, if you combine this little piece of genetic information, and obviously simplified, okay, there's more factors than that involved in skin color, but this is a simplified version showing it to you. But if you combine this idea from genetics with a historical event, which is described in the Bible, we call it the Tower of Babel, when all human beings up until that point in time spoke one language, they were all together, probably freely intermixing amongst the people on earth at that point in time. And they decided to build this tower, which we believe was meant to be a worship tower. And it says that they wanted really to become as gods themselves. And God said, nope, that's not going to go. The creator said no. And so he came down and disturbed the languages and confused the languages. Now we have different people groups going in different directions. And so if we were to have a predominance of families with dark colored skin going off in one direction, light colored skin in other directions, so on, we could get what we call racial characteristics cemented within smaller populations within a very short time after the Tower of Babel. And so it fits with his history as well as with science to explain the origin of the various races. And it doesn't have to be an evolutionary explanation like Darwin had, you know, that we came from different lines of apes and monkeys. And really shows us that we really, as human beings, there really is only one race. It's called the human race, right? And so we are really all related. Well, here's a question. According to evolution, how do you get new genetic information? I mean, if you're going to go from molecules to man, somehow you have to generate hundreds and hundreds and thousands of bits of information, don't you? Genetic information has to come from someplace. And according to evolution, if you leave God out of the picture, it has to come about naturalistically. And so, you know, Darwin didn't really know. He accepted kind of an idea called Lamarckianism, or a form of Lamarckianism. And that was the idea that there's an inheritance of acquired traits. So something that happens in your lifetime could be passed on, supposedly. Like the giraffe, they said at one point was a short-necked animal, and then there was drought, and the giraffe stretched their necks to reach the foliage in the trees, and that stretched neck was then passed on to the next generation of giraffes. Most scientists today have pretty well excluded Lamarckianism. It doesn't, we haven't demonstrated it. And so Darwin didn't know anything about mutations really, though. It's interesting. I'm wondering though, epigenetics, does it fit in any way with Lamarckianism, at least on a very at least on a very limited, limited scale. Here's a quote from Jeffrey Tompkins again. He says, everywhere they look, researchers are finding new examples of epigenetic modifications that add or remove special chemical tags in an organism's DNA structure without altering the genetic code. So the DNA code remains the same, but there are chemical tags that attach to the DNA molecule, which again will influence how that DNA is expressed. He says, what's even more incredible is that these alterations can be inherited over multiple generations. So something that happens to you in the environment could be inherited. That's a fascinating idea to me, very fascinating. I think it's going to deserve a whole lot more research. So that's kind of one of those, stay tuned. Let's see what else we discover as the years go by here. So what are the proposed mechanisms that are generally accepted for what's now called neo-Darwinism? Neo-Darwinism says it's mutation plus natural selection leads to evolutionary change. The two processes there then being mutation plus natural selection. Problem is, neither mutation nor natural selection can create anything. They can only operate on what's already in existence. So if you're going to mutate a gene, you have to have a gene there to mutate. So it doesn't explain how do we get that genetic information in the first place. It can explain perhaps why we have mutations and why we see some things taking place at that level, but it doesn't create anything. Natural selection can't really create anything either. It can only select from what is expressed, from what is expressed due to the genetics of certain creatures. And so it's kind of like if you are offered orange juice or apple juice, you can't get grape juice out of it. You know, you can only select what's already there. So neither one of these are creative mechanisms, and yet supposedly that's how we get all of the variation that we see in life today. The question comes though is, where do we get life in the first place? I mean, according to evolution, somehow we have to go from non-living molecules to living molecules, to living beings, right? Some sort of simple life at the beginning, it's proposed, but nobody's ever been able to demonstrate how that happens. There's been some experiments, famous Stanley Miller experiment, and some others that propose that that's how, you know, at least that it would be possible to get life that way. But nobody's ever really done it in the laboratory or even come close to creating life in the laboratory. Franklin M. Harold says this: we must concede that there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical or cellular system, only a variety of wishful speculations. Well, wishful speculations is not scientific. Now we can have a wishful hypothesis that we could go test, hopefully, but just speculating on things does not make it science, does not tell us it's true. Just the sentence before he said that one, he said, we should reject as a matter of principle the substitution of intelligent design for the dialogue of chance and necessity. So he's already ruled out the possibility of intelligence being involved in the design of living organisms, and yet he's saying we really don't have any, we have no evidence, we have no way to see what's true and what isn't. When it comes to the origin of life, evolution has lots of speculation because, like I said, nobody's ever seen it happen. Now, what about the creation model? Is it consistent? I believe it's consistent with what we see in the living world, because one of the very best known laws of biology is life comes only from life, right? It's one of the first things you learn in biology class. It takes life to get life. And so according to the creation model, where did the first life come from? It was created by a supernatural creator. Of course, then the question comes, where did that creator get life, right? And we don't know that scientifically. There's no way we can tell that scientifically, but we have a history book, again, the Bible, that tells us that this creator is eternal, that he himself is eternal life. And so it is a consistent model, at least. Now, you may scoff at that. You may say, oh, you know, now you're bringing religion into it. But otherwise, you're just bringing wishful speculations into it. And so really, like I said in the beginning, Either evolution or creation, both of them require faith at some point in time. Evolution requires faith in time and chance and natural processes. Creation requires faith in a supernatural creator. But I believe it's more consistent with what we actually see. Here's another question for you. According to the actual observations, what do mutations produce? Well, we know they produce things like two-headed snakes and cattle with extra legs and roosters without any feathers on them, all kinds of aberrations. And if you go into the genetics labs or go in the science department where they're doing genetics, you'll find fruit flies all the time, right, that escape their experiments. And you can find fruit flies. They've done genetic research with fruit flies for generation after generation after generation. And they get all sorts of different flies. Flies with curly wings, flies with straight wings, flies with 2 wings, flies with 4 wings. But guess what? They're still what? Flies, fruit flies. They don't change into anything else. Lots of variation within that fruit fly type. Yes, some mutations even occurring within that fruit fly type. Most of those mutations, by the way, would not survive in the wild. And so, they would be selected against right away and would probably just pass off the scene. But what do we actually see then when we look at observed the observations of mutations? We can get duplication of information, like 4 wings instead of 2, but the information is already there, and the instructions for making wings is already there. And so we can get duplication of that information. We can get loss of information or the breakdown of information. And that one's what we see a lot when people talk about evidence of evolution. A lot of times that's what it is a loss or breakdown. Sometimes we get deregulation of genetic information, like in cancer cells, where they're just not regulated properly and they continue to multiply, and we can get aging and death. These are what we actually observed from mutations, by and large. Now, sometimes people will point to one little thing and say, well, here's a mutation that caused something a little better. And they'll point to things like flightless beetles. Well, is it an advantage to be without flight? They say, well, that kept them on the islands. Otherwise, they'd blow off the islands. But they've lost their ability to fly. I'm not sure if that really is a beneficial thing or not. They'll show you examples like blind cave fish and so on. But each one of these has to do with the loss or breakdown of information or the switching on and off of existing genetic information. It's not adding anything new, really. And so, again, if we want to demonstrate evolution, we need to demonstrate how do you get new genetic information, truly, because we need to go from molecules to man and generate lots and lots and lots of genetic information. Well, sometimes people will bring up the citrate metabolizing E. coli and say, well, there's some evidence. And here's an article by Don Patton. It says, bacteria evolving in a lab. They call it a poke in the eye for anti-evolutionists. Well, these were E. coli, which were able to, instead of feeding only on glucose, were able to feed on this citrate instead. But it was because of a breakdown, a loss of genetic information, a loss of something that turned off a particular system, not the gaining of new information. In general, if you talk to the population at large and you ask, are mutations beneficial or harmful? Most people would say they're harmful, wouldn't they? I mean, if you have a friend and they have a new baby and you call them up and they say, oh, my baby was born with a genetic mutation. You don't jump up and down and go, oh, yeah, that's wonderful. In general, we'd go, oh, that's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that, because we know that mutations are normally harmful. Now, why is that? Well, it's because if you take an ordered system that works and you throw in random changes, the chances of it getting better are very slim, aren't they? But the chance of it getting a lot worse are a whole lot more likely. It's kind of like if you're working on a term paper on your computer and you get a phone call and you go get your phone and meanwhile a 2-year-old comes in and starts typing on your computer. What's the chance you're going to have a better term paper when you're done? Probably not. In fact, it probably won't make any sense at all after that. And so random changes to orderly systems do not normally result in something better. Well, that's kind of a general statement, but Dr. John Sanford is a genetic researcher, and he wrote this book called Genetic Entropy. He says this: the primary axiom of Darwinian evolution is that evolution proceeds by mutation plus natural selection. And he says in the book, you know, if you can show that doesn't work, then you don't need all these other proofs or evidences of the failure of evolution. He's saying that right there. You just knocked it out of the water. Well, his qualifications, he's a retired Cornell University professor. It's got a lot of articles and patents in genetic engineering and research. He was the co-inventor of the gene gun process, which is the method that was used in order to sequence DNA molecules. This guy knows a whole lot more about genetics than I do. But here's what he says in his book. He says mutational entropy, or the degradation of the genetic material because of mutations, appears to be so strong, especially within large genomes, that selection, natural selection, should not be able to reverse it. Careful analysis on many levels consistently reveals that the primary axiom is absolutely wrong. What was the primary axiom? Mutation plus natural selection is the mechanism of evolution, right? He said that's wrong. He says if mutation and selection can't prevent the degeneration of the genome, then the primary axiom is wrong. I love this quote. He says it's not just implausible, it's not just unlikely, it's absolutely dead wrong. It's not just a false axiom, it's an unsupported and discredited hypothesis which can be confidently rejected. Well, that's pretty important, isn't it? So if you're in a classroom and they tell you, well, mutation plus natural selection is the mechanism of evolution, Dr. John Sanford says you can confidently reject that idea. And if you're interested in looking more at that, I would strongly recommend getting hold of his book on genetic entropy. So we look at these mechanisms of mutation and natural selection. They cannot explain the origin of new kinds of living things. And so we can say for change, well, just say no. We don't have the evidence that we need for the mechanism of evolution. What about similarities? This is a whole nother category of evidence that is used oftentimes as evidence of evolution. And the idea is, if we evolved from other creatures, we should have some record of that evolution. Then we should still be able to see some similarities between us and our common ancestors. And so, well, books will tell you, yes, indeed, we have that. They call it homology, and they'll look at the horse's leg and the man's arm, the dog's leg and the bat's wing, and they look at the basic similarity in structure with one bone up here and a couple down here and several in the wrist and hand. Based on that, they say, see, that shows we had common ancestry. Well, is that the only explanation? I mean, if things did evolve from common ancestors, we should find some similarities, right? But can we turn that argument upside down and say just because things are similar, that means they evolved? Maybe they're similar for a different reason. Maybe they're similar because they were designed for a similar function. So what we're seeing is variation on a theme. You're sitting in a chair, that chair is similar to the chair in your car, or, you know, your easy chair at home. Lots of similarities, but that doesn't mean they came from a common ancestor. Or maybe the similarity is there, shows that they were designed by the same designer. There's only one designer, not a whole pantheon of gods or creators. So that one is kind of like if you go into a art museum, you can pick out the pieces that were done by the same artist based on their use of style and colors and so on and themes. And so we can see that similarity there. Maybe things are similar because they were designed to work together. We live in a universe. We have ecological systems, and in all the animals and plants and human beings, we all are utilizing the same kinds of biochemistry, and we're all utilizing the same elements and minerals and so on. We're all under the same constraints, physical properties, of the physical properties of gases and liquids and solids and gravity and so on. And so we would expect that there would be some similarities just because we're designed to live in similar systems. But yet the books will show you things like this. This is your very first baby picture, you might say, at 2 months in development. And they say, look, you had gill slits and a yolk sac and a tail. Well, even in the words that are used already, we're introducing some sort of a bias. Because when you look at these things that they call gill slits in the human baby, they don't contain gills. They don't develop into the structure of a gills. They're not even slits. They're little areas, little pouches that develop into the neck and the jaw region in human beings. Very important for human development, but they're just plain not gills. Now, it's true that in a fish, you've got that same area develops into gills. So similarity is there, but is it because of common ancestry? I don't think so, because it really, they don't have a similar function. The yolk sac, they call it a yolk sac, but human beings don't need yolk. So that little sac is for producing the first blood cells until the little baby's big enough to make the blood and the bones and so on. Later on, it just drops off. It's not needed anymore. What about the tail? Sure looks like a tail, doesn't it? But it's just the end of the spinal column, and it's got to end someplace. Right here in this stage of development, it grows a little more quickly than the rest of that little baby and stimulates the growth of the legs and other structures in that area, the body. It's not a tail. It's just the end of the spinal column. And so these things that are called leftovers from evolution, based on similarity, we could just say no to those things. What about the biogenetic law that was first put forth by Ernst Haeckel? He was a strong proponent of Darwinian evolution. He lived during Darwin's time. He drew these pictures showing the similarity of the embryos, fish, salamander, turtle, chicken, rabbit, human, showing how similar they are. And again, trying to indicate common ancestry and show our relationship to the animals in the animal kingdom, showing that we're just highly evolved animals. Well, problem with that was these drawings were fraudulent. There's a lot more differences than what he's showing in the diagrams. And this whole idea ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Now we know that that's false. Now, what did that mean? It meant that as a human baby would develop inside the mother's womb, it would repeat the stages of evolution. So in other words, human development was looked at just as accelerated evolution. It doesn't work that way. And this evidence also, we can just say no to that. Now, the one they're using a lot today is biochemical similarity or biochemical homology. And so what they do here is to compare different kinds of chemicals like the DNA or the RNA or proteins, the amino acid sequence in proteins and so on. They'll make those comparisons, and based on those comparisons, come up with some sort of tree of life, with the idea being that the closer we are and the closer the chemicals and so on, the biochemicals, that just indicates that we're more closely related to those kinds of creatures in the evolutionary history. Is it true though? You know, as you look at it, even in popular magazines, we see that this oftentimes is where people learn their science. Here's an article in Time magazine, How We Became Human. Chimps and humans share almost 99% of their DNA. Well, first couple questions come to mind if you read that. Number one, how do they know that? Right? Is that an accurate statement? And number two is, so what? Does it mean we evolved just because we are similar in some ways? And so we need to look a little further. And the questions you need to ask is, how do they know that? When you're looking at these percentage numbers, we find that they really don't add up to the 99%. You need to dig a little further, because some of these 98, 99% were based on just very small pieces of the DNA that they already thought were going to line up. And they didn't take the whole DNA sequence and so on. And so you really need to dig further. As people have been doing more research here, they're finding that number is going down. And it depends on what you're testing, what that number is. Some of the studies are showing that 86% similarity is conservative. Looks like it may be as low as 70% almost. And so You know, which one is it? We need to look a little more critically at some of that data when it comes out. Good book to look at when it comes to more in-depth stuff regarding genetics and this creation model is this book, Replacing Darwin, The New Origin of Species by Dr. Nathaniel Jensen. And I'd really recommend that book to you also if you're interested in a little more details and of the biology and so on. But so what? What if we are similar to apes and monkeys? The mouse, they say, is 97.5% similar to humans in their DNA. Does that mean we evolved from mice? You know, or the zebrafish, 92%. I like this one, the bananas, 50%. Maybe we evolved from bananas. Way back in 1985, Michael Denton wrote a book called Evolution, A Theory in Crisis. He's a molecular biologist. He was not a creation scientist when he wrote this book. But what he did say, among other things, that was very significant, he says a real significant finding that comes to light by comparing the protein amino acid sequences is that it is impossible to arrange them in any sort of evolutionary series. That was way back in 1985. He was seeing problems with trying to come up with an evolutionary series based on the variation within various kinds of biochemicals. Michael Lynch said this: clarification of the phylogenetic, that's a fancy word for evolutionary, relationships of the major animal phyla has been an elusive problem. Well, that's interesting. With analyses based on different genes, look at this, even different analyses based on the same genes yielding a diversity of phylogenetic or evolutionary trees. What do you say? Even when you base it on the same gene, you can come up with different phylogenetic evolutionary trees. So it's not as simple as what we're often led to believe. New Scientist published this article, I believe, 2009, I think it was, and it was called Uprooting Darwin's Tree. And it says in there, for a long time, the holy grail was to build a tree of life. A few years ago, it looked as though that grail was within reach, but today the project lies in tatters, torn to pieces by an onslaught of negative evidence. What's the negative evidence? If you read the article, you find out they're talking about DNA studies. And the DNA studies that are coming to light are showing, wait, it's not so simple to form this tree of life as what we were thinking. And they say the tree of life, one of the iconic concepts of evolution, has turned out to be a figment of our imagination. Well, if that's true, how come we still have the tree of life in museums and in the textbooks and so on, if there's all those problems with them? And in fact, as we look at the tree of life, it really is not representing what's being discovered nowadays. They say this: we have no evidence at all that the tree of life is a reality. Interesting. Then they said biology is vastly more complex than we thought, and facing up to this complexity will be scary. I love that, but I don't find it scary. Now, why would they say that facing that complexity is scary, except that they're trying to explain this complexity on the basis of time and chance and natural processes? I look at that complexity, and the more complexity, the more levels and layers of complexity that we find, the more it points to the intelligence and the wisdom and the power of a supernatural creator, not just time and chance. So this tree of life is being cut down by science itself. Well, let's look at one more here from biology before we get to the fossils. And then this category, we just like to call junk. And really, it's based on the idea of vestigial organs or leftovers from evolution. At one point in time, they had a list of 180 different things in the human body that they said were leftover from evolution that really didn't have any function today. And things that were on that list were things like the pituitary gland and the thymus, tonsils, appendix, wisdom teeth, and a bunch more. Well, as a creationist, I would say, let's go find out. Let's do the research. Let's find out what these things do in the human body, because I don't start from the perspective of saying it's junk. I start from the perspective instead of saying we have a supernatural creator. He doesn't make junk. There's a purpose for whatever that creator does. So let's go into the lab. Let's find out what really is the purpose of this. And of course, they've done that kind of thing in the lab. They find out the pituitary gland is oftentimes called the master gland of the body. It's involved in regulation of so many different systems within the body, biochemical systems. The thymus, the tonsils, and even the appendix are involved in immunity. The appendix, you used to think, oh, just take it out. It's not worth anything. Well, today the doctors are saying don't remove an appendix unless it repeatedly gets infected, or if it's obviously an emergency if it needs to be. But the appendix is involved in immunity. Wisdom teeth, what are they for? Chewing, just like other teeth, right? Now, sometimes people don't have their mouth doesn't develop big enough to really accommodate those teeth anymore. And if so, okay, they can be removed. But just because something goes wrong at some point doesn't mean it doesn't have a purpose in the first place, right? Many people still have wisdom teeth, and they have plenty of space for them. That argument, by the way, is interesting, isn't it? Just because something can go wrong with something, does that mean it's useless? I mean, something can go wrong with your heart too, right? That doesn't mean it's useless. Or they will say, well, you can live without it. Well, yes, you can live without your wisdom teeth. You can live without your appendix and your tonsils and so on. But does that mean it had no function to start with? You can live without your hand too, right? Obviously has function. So this idea of vestigial or leftover organs with no purpose really doesn't hold up. Again, the one that's been used a lot in recent years was the idea of junk DNA. When they first sequenced the DNA molecule, they're going, well, there's only about 3% of it that's active in coding for proteins. And so 97% of the DNA molecule in human beings is leftover from evolution, has no function. Well, as a creationist, we predicted way back then when they first were coming out with these things that go back to the lab, do the research, and find out what is the function of these areas called that are included in this stuff called junk DNA. And certainly this research has been done, and it's ongoing. John Sanford says it's becoming increasingly clear that most or all of the genome is functional. The stuff that they were calling junk DNA has a very important function and purpose. In 2012, they came out with the results of what was called the ENCODE project. And the ENCODE project was an international, many different nations combining to do the research and put in the research. And what they were trying to look at was this stuff called junk DNA. Did it have a purpose or didn't it? Was it functional or wasn't it? And what they came back was almost every nucleotide is associated with a function. Well, that's interesting. That's not junk then, is it? They said this metaphor of junk isn't that useful. Yeah, and the key point is this, it's not junk. The key point is it's very, very important. Here's just a few of the things that this area is called junk DNA, or non-protein coding DNA is useful for repairing DNA, for assisting in DNA replication. Well, if you didn't have that, you couldn't multiply your DNA. Well, that wouldn't be any good. Regulating DNA transcription, that's the process by which we get our proteins produced. That's certainly pretty important. Aiding in the folding of chromosomes, aiding in the maintenance of chromosomes, controlling RNA editing and splicing, helping to fight disease, and regulating embryological development. So if you didn't have these kinds of genes, so-called junk, before, you wouldn't even be here because you need it for regulating embryological development. So all these things that they call junk, they really have function. And the articles, lots and lots and lots of articles been coming out recently on that. There's a new evidence of functionality for the so-called junk DNA. An article came out just in July this year. And it says the potential role of junk DNA sequence in aging and cancer. So looking at a section that was called junk DNA, and it says regarding the so-called junk DNA region, And they have the number of the gene here. Researcher Zhu says, our study describes that one of those units actually has a function in that it enhances the activity of the telomerase gene. What is that? Well, that controls the length of basically the length of the chromosomes and so on, and the telomere region, which is involved in aging and in cancer, they believe. So we're looking at all these areas and things that they call junk, and really junk DNA hits the trash. It's not junk. It looks like it was designed. So we can look at all these supposed evidences of evolution, change, similarity, junk, and just say no to these things. So was Darwin wrong about biology? Well, I think he was right about some things, but he was wrong perhaps because he just didn't have the evidence yet. I mean, Darwin had no idea of the complexity of living cells. At that point in time, living cells were thought to be just a bag of protoplasm. He didn't understand anything about the units within the cell and all of the biochemistry that goes on within inside cells. He didn't know anything about genetics. Mendel's work in genetics came out shortly after Darwin's work. I think if Mendel's work had been there and Darwin had been familiar with it, it explains a lot of what he was trying to explain by his idea of evolution by natural selection. He'd never heard of DNA, proteins, didn't have any idea of the relationships there. So, we can give Darwin a little bit of a break. I don't know what would have happened. Maybe if he would have had this information, we wouldn't be talking about Darwinism today. But the real only hard evidence we have is fossils, right? Hard evidence from the earth. Dave studies fossils a lot more than I do, so he's going to come up now and talk about fossil evidence.
Thank you, Mary Jo.
Hey, okay, so I'm going to try to hurry through this quite a bit. So, all right. So the fossil record, was Darwin wrong about fossils? He was right about one thing. At that point in time, he said the fossils don't support his theory. And we're 100% sure of that. Okay, and now it's 120, 130, maybe even longer than that. They started writing that, all right, well, this was a quote one back then. Still the same problem. The fossils don't support his theory. And these are evolutionists saying that. Now, the thing is, the answer we almost always get is keep digging. They ought to find the fossils. That's what Darwin said. That's what we hear today at the university. The problem is, it isn't a lack of fossils. We have over 1 billion fossils right now. Literally, now I don't, no exaggeration. Over 1 billion fossils. No, I wish. No, yeah. But anyhow, but they don't have the fossils in the right spot. Okay, and they don't show the things that evolution was hoping it would show. All right, according to David Kitts, he's saying the same, or Richard E. Dawkins says this. No, this is David Kitts, right? Evolution requires the intermediate forms between species, but the study of fossils, paleontology, does not provide them. All right, they knew that. Okay, Arrow White specializes in fish, another evolutionist. He says, but whatever ideas authorities may have on the subject, the lungfishes, that's your great-great-granddaddy, according to evolution, okay? The lungfishes, like every other major group of fishes that I know, have their origins firmly based in nothing. Oh my goodness. Then he said, as an evolutionist, I have often thought how little I should like to have to prove organic evolution in a court of law. He knows he doesn't have the evidence, okay? But we see textbook pictures like this all the time, showing how one thing turns into something else, correct? We see them all the way clear down to 4th and 5th grades, and those pictures sometimes direct our mind to believe in evolution for the rest of our lives, unless we see other evidence. And that's basically what happened to me. Turns out, after I did some studying, that I found out that's nice artwork, right? That's nice artwork, but that's not what they found. All they have are the end products there with nothing in between whatsoever. And that doesn't fit the evolutionary model at all in this case. So yes, we have over 1 billion fossils, only a few dubious things. Some of those we'll probably mention yet tonight, okay? So evolution would predict for fossils that you should see a lot of links, and the answer to that one is no. Okay, you don't find enough links to make a good case for evolution. It also says that if you dig down into the rock layers, you should find at the very bottom rock layers things that are extremely simple, not complex yet. And then as time marches on, things will get more and more and more complex, okay? All right, and you should see evidence of that constant change. All right, we should see that, the type of change that evolution would require. Well, we go down to the Cambrian, and basically the Cambrian exhibit here at the Denver Museum says 545 million, I'm going to call them evolutionary years ago, there was an explosion of life, and all the different body shapes and parts and plans popped, get that word, popped into existence. And you say, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like slow and gradual Darwinian change, does it? And that's called the Cambrian explosion. And sure enough, all of a sudden we see extreme complexity with nothing leading up to it in the fossil record. They're there. For instance, things called trilobites, and we find out they had very complex eyes. In fact, 2 different types of eyes already in the Cambrian. And then now they're found another type of an eye, and they don't know what it really is, but there are thousands of those particular eye lenses that are preserved in the fossil record because of the material. And they have over 3,000 lenses for each one. And it looks like the eye, they said, from a recently swatted fly. And it's found clear down in the Cambrian, way down there. And they said their discovery reveals that some of the earliest animals possess very powerful vision. Similar eyes are found in many living insects, such as robber flies. If you know about robber flies, that's an extremely complex eye, and the fossil looks identical to the one that we have in the living robber fly. And so that's extreme complexity way down there, but it looks like a robber fly, but it can't be. Do you know why? Robber flies supposedly haven't evolved yet. And not only that, insects supposedly had not evolved until about 250 million years later. All right, so that's, so we have to throw that one out, right? No, we don't throw it out, but it's an enigma right now. Okay, so the lowest life forms, simple? No, they're very, very complex. What about the type of change you would expect? Well, we see a lot of things just absolutely not changing, like a couple of different shells separated in time from modern beaches to way back then. No change. Sassafras leaves are sassafras leaves, okay? Yeah, you can see that in the fossil record. Here's an unchanged pine cone and unchanged dragonfly, both found in the very same type of layers, and they're finding out 140 million years and absolutely no change. There's a thing called genetic drift. There should be some change, but no, they're already there. All right, they found a mite in amber way back in the Triassic, supposedly 230 million years old. Now, I don't go for these dates myself, okay? I used to, all right? I used to until I started studying into it very deeply, okay? But there's a mite, it's the same mite we have today, not one iota of difference. If we study fossil insects, it's like studying fossil of what we have right now, today, okay? That's what it is. And insects have always been insects. Denver Museum, the first sharks evolved 450 million evolutionary years ago. And then it says sharks have changed very little over the years. Oh, come on, there should be some kind of change, shouldn't there be? And now they have a living shark. They actually found it still swimming, but what they found out, it is identical to the same shark found in the fossil record, supposedly 420 million years old. Same, okay? It died just a couple of days later, actually. It was in the death throes where they found it. And so they found fish clear down in the Cambrian too now. That's not where it should be. And in fact, they're very complex. They're vertebrates, yeah. Advanced eyes is what they're saying in this particular article here. Blood vessels, gills, digestive system, muscular, swimming, all the parts are there. It's all working. So it's a fish, all right? That's not what they expected. The coelacanth is a common one that's been referred to. It's supposedly extinct for 65 million evolutionary years, okay? And unchanged since the first time you find it in the fossil record, supposedly 420 million years. And they said, that thing right there, they used to call that a proto-leg. Now that's an evolutionary loaded term. That's assuming something, the evolution. Proto-leg means it's on its way to becoming a leg. See the twists that you have on it? No. Turned out when they did the research, they found living coelacanths off the coast of Madagascar. They're still swimming, okay? And when they did the research, they found that proto-leg, guess what? It looks pretty fishy. Yeah, it sure does. And in fact, this was unchanged as near as we can tell from the fossil record to the living one. Not one bit of difference. When you find woodpeckers in the fossil record, they're 100% woodpeckers. Over 1,400 now. Bats found a new deposit. 1,400 bats have been discovered, and but none of them are intermediate. They're 100% bats. Nothing showing how an insectivore eventually became a bat. Same thing with the hummingbirds, okay? When you find a hummingbird in the fossil record, it's 100% hummingbird, okay? No changes whatsoever. Here's a lizard that was found. Exactly, we have the same species today. We can tell you what it was eating probably, okay? Because we can observe them today. But it was found in amber, like pine pitch, okay? So constant change, we don't see that kind of constant change, okay? So every one of the predictions that evolution would make about the fossil record is no, but the biblical record of creation, complexity everywhere, and then the stasis, no change, distinct kinds. Yeah, why would we say complexity should be found everywhere? Because we're living in an ecosystem. Everything has to interrelate if God created, right? And so if there's any kind of preservation, it should be complex because it has to be complex to be interrelating. Things are staying put, yeah. But what I see of the fossil record, I see evidence of something burying them very rapidly. So that's the creation, the fall, death, struggle, and then the flood, the burial. Okay, that's what I see. It fits the model. What we do see is the fossils show animals were created after their own kind, distinct groups. Some variation within those groups, okay, but not one group changing into another group. We don't see that in the fossil record. We don't see it in the living record either. That's exactly what the biblical record says. 10 times, Genesis chapter 1, etc. Things were created after their own kind. All right, now I didn't always believe that. This is a picture of me clear back when I was about 10 years old. Kind of cute guy, wasn't I? Yeah, still am. No, a little bushier. But anyhow, I was teaching on a television program in Grand Junction, Colorado, how the study of rocks and fossils and dinosaurs proved evolution. I can already teach it at that young age because that is all I had ever been taught. That's what the books taught. I was a student of paleontology. I'd go out in the desert, I would look for fossils, and I'd then compare what I had just found with all the text and all the books to identify them. By the time I was 13, I already found skeletal remains of 2 different dinosaurs in Western Colorado and into Utah. Already had found that because one was a Stegosaurus, another one Allosaurus. Okay. And I was well on my way to becoming Dinosaur Dave, actually. Today I made it to Dinosaur Dave, but I think it's because of age. Anyhow, there wasn't, so I really believed in evolution for years and years, and it was really an interesting paradigm switch when all of a sudden, woohoo, what do you mean the fossil record doesn't support evolution? That took me by surprise, but the more I studied it, you might say the more I ended up evolving into a creationist from an evolutionist. Right? Well, it was this book that Mary Jo found that started us on the path, okay? Started us doing our own research. You know, got to thinking, why did I so much believe in evolution? It's because of artwork. It wasn't because I studied the actual evidences given for evolution. It was the artwork. Like this one here, most kids look at that and say, oh yeah, I can understand how Eohippus, the dawn horse, evolves into the modern present day horse, right? Yeah, it looks good. A lot of spots, fewer spots, no spots. Most kids don't reason. How do you know about spots from a pile of bones? And petrified at that. There are many things wrong with this horse series that we never heard about in all of my education until I started looking at it after I was already teaching on the university or college level. Okay, for instance, this little guy here, his correct scientific name is Hyracotherium, not even a horse. Okay, not even Hippus, the horse kind. And we have living Hyracotheriums today. Did you know that? Same basic look. And there's one that's about the size of a rabbit. How would you like to put a saddle on that beast? You're not going to get very far. And they're now finding the bones of present day horse in rock layers at and below his supposed ancestors in the rock layers. He said, wait a minute, you can't be your own grandmother. So there's a problem here, right? I never knew that. Problem with the foot structure, tooth structure. How do you go from a browsing tooth to a grazing tooth? Not leaving the transitions that are necessary. All right. And so all these things I never heard about. I look at the great artwork here. This is a textbook. It shows how the fish is going to turn into the amphibian over millions of years. And so I always like to get people to say, when you see a picture like that in your book, especially when I talk to younger kids, I ask them to ask a question. And what the question is, kiddos?
Where's the evidence?
Hey, they listened. Good job. All right. What's the evidence for that? Well, turns out nothing at the time that book was written. They didn't have any evidence for the fish, the amphibian. Now they've had about 7 different candidates for that, and every one of them has fizzled. And that would include, well, I'll get to that. But the missing links, according to this textbook, show how this process of evolution took place. Now, a younger person like I was soaking up this evolution stuff wouldn't think about asking the question, how can something missing show anything? A little issue there. All right. Well, since this book has been written now, that the picture we're from, they now have a good candidate. At least they said it now. It's called Tiktaalik, one of the big icons of evolution these days. Problem is, it's already proven wrong. All right. In fact, it was supposed to be on its way to developing four legs. Okay. So it still has this proto leg by the way, which they call wrist bones here. But come on now, that's evolutionary already. It's not a wrist bone, it's a fin bone. These are fin bones. All right, let's not call it something they are not. But it's on its way to becoming a four-legged creature. Problem is, in Poland, they found a great trackway in a rock layer lower than Tiktaalik, much lower than Tiktaalik. And it's a trackway of a four-footed creature already crisscrossing back and forth. You can't be your own grandmother. And so now Tiktaalik is already out the window. I like what they said here. Jennifer Clack from University of Cambridge said this: we thought we pinned down the origin of limb tetrapods. We have to rethink the whole thing. All right, that was 2016. All right, okay. Look at the bias that sometimes enters in. Remember Mary Jo talked about the different colors, glasses, right? All right, look at this one. Sharks and dolphins, for example, have comparable body shapes, though one is a fish, the other a mammal. Such disparate creation as bats, birds, and butterflies all have wings in common. But, they said, they had to evolve from somewhere. What are they assuming? Naturalistic evolution, right? They're assuming it as a fact. And it now kind of flavors or colors, you might say, their research. Okay, what about the beautiful pictures you see in whale evolution? Now, this is out of a grade 4, unit 4 lesson. You know, you got to start hammering it in at a young age. By the time you're at university, you probably already accept evolution, or at least have heard it. A lot of young people are that way. Okay. Grade 4. Oh my. What about that guy? Great artwork. What's the evidence for him? Okay, what is it? Well, they say that slow and gradual adaptations working with natural selection over all those millions of years will turn that guy into that whale. All right, now most kids, very young, they say, oh yeah, that doesn't make sense. But you keep hearing it over and over every year. And then you get to Harvard and you see their textbook, and it's the same picture basically. Okay, same thing. But anyhow, okay, let's look at this guy right here. Great artwork. Here's the evidence right here. 2 small shreds of a jaw. That's all they had. The white is added to hold it together, but that's not what they found. It's just the dark stuff. Is that enough evidence to get that whole creature? No. Okay, not at all. Okay, let's go to the next one. How about Pacocetus? This is on the front cover of Science magazine in 1983. It's on the front cover. And they said this missing link isn't missing anymore. We found it. They were ecstatic. All right. And so what's the evidence for that, right? It turns out you go to a different book, you actually find what the evidence is, and you see it right there. Wait a minute, here's the evidence. This is all they found. One bone at the back of the head, a couple of teeth, one patch of jaw, nothing else. All of a sudden we say, that's really stretching that evidence, isn't it? Great artwork, but it's not reality. Since they actually put that picture out, now they have a 2004 model. After they found more bones, etc., they found out, no, I think we're wrong. This is what Pacocetus look like. All right. So my question is the 2004 model or the 1983 model the correct model? Which one? I like it. None. All right, probably none. It's all artwork, isn't it? Okay, so now let's go to the next one. Ambulocetus. Ambulocetus. You think they have a whole skeleton, wouldn't you? Right? You would hope so, but no, they didn't find a whole skeleton at all. But look at the great artwork. Well, wait a minute, they're showing the whole skeleton. How am I going to contradict that? Well, it turned out there's reason. All right. What's the evidence? Well, there's the whole skull. They didn't find the whole skull either. All right, this is a video, just a picture off the video here, where Dr. Hans Thiessen is working with Gingerish, who actually is the discoverer of this particular fossil. And he admits that he didn't find the section of the skull that has the identifying features, such as the ear thing and also the blowhole area. That's missing, okay? That would be identifying it as a whale type thing. Okay, so he admits it right on that video. You can go look for that if you want to do that. And but anyhow, here's another picture of Ambulocetus, painting from the Smithsonian. Shows the fake blowhole as if the guy has it, right? You see it right there. And there's no fossil evidence for whale, any of the whale-like features that they're talking about. So that's a different picture of that Ambulocetus, okay? Now, a lot of people think they have the whole skeleton because they see it in the museum, especially young people. So that convinces them. All right, but here's what they found. You see this? Not enough evidence, is it? Yeah. All right, let's go to Rhodocetus. Okay, Rhodocetus right there. Rhodocetus, Dr. Gingerish was actually interviewed on video, and he says about the blowhole, because he shows it as a skull, okay, and a fluke and a whatever. He said, I speculated that it might have had a fluke. Speculated. Then why did he draw it that way? Now we've superimposed what they actually found over the top of the artwork. You see just the bones that are dark in color. In fact, this is something that a lot of people don't realize when you even look like at other skeletons, like this one here. The bones that are dark in color were found. Anything gray was not found. So in this case, only one or two teeth were found. The rest of it is added. They're not found at all. That's not it. And then you find so much of this stuff is in the gray color. All right, so we see this happening of the same thing. We superimposed actually what they found. Now, notice this. He said this, I might have had a fluke. Okay, I now doubt that. And this is the guy that specializes in these. He's the finder of it, and he's the one who runs a museum too. He says, I now doubt that Rhodocetus would have had a fluked tail. Then he goes on and says, since then we have found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arms of Rhodocetus, and we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can spread out like the flippers on a whale. So forget the flippers. Okay, now they're considering it is a land animal, not a whale. Okay, wow. By the way, they used to say that there were leftover legs found in the fossil record in some of these whale fossils. Leftover legs. Remember Mary Jo talked about vestigial organs, vestigials? This is leftover, okay? And so basically, here are some bones that are found clear in the back, and they said, aha, look at that. Those are leftover legs. That supports our idea of a four-footed creature turning into a whale. Looks good. Yeah, sure does. But now they found out that is not true. 2014 article came out. This is not a creation publication, by the way. This is University of Southern California news release, okay? And basically it's these bones are not leftover legs. They're very important in reproduction, all right? And so much, I like that. Researchers turn a long accepted evolutionary assumption, an icon of evolution, on its head, okay? So that's what's going on there, okay? Well, like I said, the same type of pictures appear all the way into Berkeley and Harvard, etc. Here's Berkeley EDU. See the same ones? Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's in UMN EDU too.
What's that?
That's in the UMN, University of Minnesota.
It is. It is. That's what they teach, probably right here. In fact, I would doubt it if they didn't. Okay. Okay. Well, wait a minute. Did birds evolve from dinosaurs? We are told that, aren't we? In fact, National Geographic had that dinosaur half bird on its cover. And we're not going to get into the great details on that. I'd love to, but guess what? There's one of their prizes. And now they found out what it is. Nothing but a forgery. They actually now have been able to establish that somebody put several different fossils together in China, in that particular district, and sold it to a museum. Made good money, I'm sure. Okay. Now they have several of the things that were half supposedly dinosaurs with feathers. They're all forgeries too, coming out of the same province. Okay. So much for that one. If you want to ask me right after this program, I better hurry along. I'll show you some more detail if you want to know about it, of some of these other supposed links. So did dinosaurs evolve into birds? I'm going to say answer no. They have actually found a dinosaur, these theropod dinosaurs, that's supposedly evolving into birds, but this one had 3 birds in its stomach. They're not evolving into birds, they're eating them. Okay. You know, a lot of people don't know it. I didn't, because none of the books I ever read taught me that, or the museums. They said fossils of modern animals, such as a whole bunch of different birds here, and some mammals, etc., are all found in dinosaur rock layers. Shouldn't be that way. It's not what we were taught, is it? So that's a problem too. Here's another issue for people who really think evolution is a fact, and all those millions of years is a fact. They've now found in dinosaur bone red blood cells, soft tissue, even strands of DNA, pieces of it, not the whole thing, in dinosaur bone. In fact, when I was a kid, I was about 13, 14, I used to find a lot of petrified dinosaur bone, a lot of agatized stuff that's no good for paleontological research, but it was really fun to cut, make jewelry out of, okay? So we had petrified dinosaur bone. It was all agatized, silicon dioxide, beautiful stuff. And basically, I was grinding and polishing on these many times. And guess what? Once in a while, I'd be grinding this rock, this dinosaur bone, and trying to shape it. You know, got a horrible rotten egg smell off of it. I didn't realize the significance. I was grinding through rotting tissue. I didn't know that, but now that's been established that that's what's going on with serious numbers of dinosaur bones, okay? The person who actually started noticing that and publishing on it, trying to publish, I should say, was Schweitzer, working with paleontologist Jack Horner. And so she wanted to get her data, her research being published on soft tissue and dinosaur. And she said, come back here. I had one reviewer tell me that he didn't care what the data said. He knew what I was finding, soft tissue and dinosaur, wasn't possible. I wrote back and said, well, what data would convince you? And he said, none. Isn't it great? Please don't bother me with the flat. Just give me the facts, ma'am. Right? Yeah. Why is a problem? Because how could all this stuff be preserved over 140 million years? How's that possible? It shouldn't be. But now they're finding even more and more different fossils with soft tissue. 200 million years, supposedly, 300. The oldest one I found so far that they've actually identified now is this soft tissue one in a 2019 Nature magazine, mentioned 500 million years old with soft tissue. Does that make you doubt those ages? It does me. Okay. Okay. What about human evolution? Well, great artwork. What's the evidence, right? Great artwork. Is that Uncle Harry? You know, it might be. Okay. But you see these textbooks. Have you grown up with those type of pictures in your textbooks? Yeah, we all do, right? And that's what helped convince me that evolution was a fact way back when. All right. Now, it was the artwork they did. And look at this. I'm not going to go into great detail, but let's look at that guy right there. What was the evidence for him? All right. It turns out all they had for this entire creature was the skull cap, nothing else. Everything else added for viewing enjoyment. No other bones at the time that particular chart was done. That's not enough evidence, is it? And it's even stretching it just to think about the skull cap there. This is out of a second grade book, Rompithecus. A man ape was not a real man. Okay, that's what the book said. All right, what's the evidence? 2 small shreds of jaw. That's all they had for him at the time that book was written. And from that, they got Mr. Rompithecus on this kid's book, plus what his family looked like. Kind of stretching it. Now they have more bones, Rompithecus, and they realize he was nothing but an ape. And that is all. But you still see this picture or these pictures in textbooks today. All right. So, oh, this is in 1922. It appeared in the newspapers and went all over the United States about human evolution, evidence found in the state of Nebraska. And in 1922, they should have looked at that and said, ooh, great artwork. What's the evidence? Turned out the evidence was 1 tooth, and that's all. I like to say 1 tooth, a whole tooth, but nothing but the tooth, you know. Yeah, I know. Boo. But it turned out that a pig has a tooth very similar to humans. Did you know that? Very similar. It turned out to be a pig's tooth. Yep. And by the way, the same variety of pig that they think it came out of now when they found more bones is still living in South America. All right. And so again, things are staying put in the fossil record. People think Lucy has proven evolution, right? This is they at one time found about 40% of the skeleton. Notice, first of all, that Lucy doesn't have hands or feet, right? Kind of hard to get around that way. But look at the museum exhibit. The whole thing. Lucy didn't have a head, but look at this. Beautiful head. This particular publication, nice face for Lucy. All right. Wow, many things wrong with it. First of all, the knee joint was not found with the rest of the skeleton. It was found about 2 miles away. Dr. Johansson actually stated that finally when asked. Okay. The head was found in another deposit 1 mile away, but assumed to be the same species. So we put a composite together. That's what's being done all the time. Okay, so keep that in mind. The French Academy of Sciences says Lucy should be taken off of our family tree because of the evidences. The Swedish and Norwegian have been working with it as well. And they found out, oh my goodness, the pelvic girdle was too small, too constricted. Lucy could never give birth. So Lucy's a he, not a she. That puts Lucy in a different species even, okay? All right, so there are problems even with Lucy. Piltdown Man was nothing but a hoax. Somebody took the jaw of an ape, put it together with the skull of a modern man, filed down the teeth, and said, here's what we found. After a lot of debate, this is the picture that went in textbooks and in museums and all over, okay? The problem was it took them 30 years to find out it was indeed a hoax. But now they took it out of the textbooks. Well, you'd think so, but it was still in textbooks for another 50 to 60 years. Wow. Okay, this was Tim White. This is right out of the textbook. It says here, Tim White, who's a paleoanthropologist, made this reconstruction of an Afarensis skull, that's Lucy and friends, using parts of, wait a minute, what's that word right there? Several individuals, right? The section of the back of the skull is the crushed cranium mentioned in the text. It contains 107 separate pieces. Again, pieced together from several individuals. Okay, that's a composite. You see a lot of composites out there. All right, now, so they're talking here in Time magazine about a bunch of scraps of the skull over here. And then they're talking about this one toe bone and showing this toe bone proves the creature walked on two legs. Problem is, the toe bone was found 10 miles away from the rest of the skeleton. And they assumed it was the same species. Okay, lots of room for error there. In fact, Johansen, who put together and pieced together Lucy, guess what? He doesn't like it when somebody else does that. Okay, so he went on record to say he's dubious about trying to categorize these together. All right, so anyhow, a good book for you to get, you can get it on our website at discovercreation.org, or to go to your library and ask for interlibrary loan, because the library probably doesn't have it. Okay, but it includes the latest on human evolution. How about Neanderthal? What about Lucy, Ida, Artie, Naledi? All of these things are in there. And that's in the book called Contested Bones. Okay, a good work there. So what do the fossils really indicate? What would they do? We see complexity everywhere. We say a limited change, distinct groups, sudden burial. In fact, that was buried so quickly, he's having his lunch when both of them got trapped. We see evidence of the flood in there too, don't we? And we're going to be talking tomorrow night, same channel, it's right here. We're going to be talking tomorrow night about the lot of water for a lot of time. Which is it, right? And we're going to show you geologic and archaeologic evidence that indeed there was a flood, and it was major, okay, worldwide type flood. Okay, so we see that all of this on the fossil record fits with the biblical record of creation, the fall, and a flood. All right, so that's what we're looking at. Make sure you visit our website, okay? Come to one of our creation tours, if you can do it. All right, whether it be Costa Rica or Yellowstone, give tours to those places from a Christian and creationist perspective. All right, we're going to stop right here for right now, and we're going to ask, are there questions? Let's put down just a couple of ground rules. Go ahead there, Pardiel.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Whew, that was a whirlwind.
Yeah, very good. So appreciate that. Yep, we have just a reminder that we have another presentation tomorrow night in this room, and it's going to be
Lots of water.
geology, lots of water, lots of time. Which is it? So that's going to be our presentation tomorrow. Dave is going to be, I think, presenting that one as a geologist. That's one of my favorites. Lots of eye candy of geologic formations around the world.
Oh my, it's just
And
amazing what you're going to see.
Explanations supporting a worldwide flood. So that's tomorrow night. And did you guys learn something new tonight? Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, pretty exciting. Question and answer. So we're going to do Q&A here, and we just ask that if you're going to make a comment, that you also include a question. Otherwise, it's just prefer questions, and save your comments maybe if it's just a comment for like a personal conversation after. Dave and Mary Jo are willing to hang out after the group Q&A, but yeah, go ahead.
So Mary Jo's going to come up too. Like I said last night, I let her answer all the hard ones. And they're all hard. I once in a while jump in there. All right, so who wants to go first? One, two. Okay, here. Number one, right over here.
Not really. I think we were just, oh, okay. Question was it hard for us to renounce evolution? Because we were very well ingrained in it. It was not hard for me, in that it was so exciting to see, a different way to look at the evidence. And, I think for us, I felt like almost a relief at that point in time that, okay, I could believe the Bible, and it wasn't committing intellectual suicide to believe the Bible. It was actually looking at evidence through a different set of lenses that the evidence can be explained very well by a creation model.
For me, I was rather perturbed that all this evidence was out there and they never told me any of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had a little indignation there.
We've had other students tell us that. In fact, we had a high school that we did a series of several lectures, and at the end of the time, one of the students, she just got really angry. She said, how come we've never been told this? How come they've lied to us, basically? And she was an excellent student. She was an A student all the way around, and she was just looking at the evidence. But it is when you really start thinking about it, why don't they give students the opportunity to see both sides and to make up your own mind? And of course, if we have people that are teaching evolution, they're very convinced of it. But oftentimes, people are convinced of evolution many times in spite of the evidence. They might find problems in their own little area of specialty, but they think, well, certainly the geologist has the evidence. The biologist thinks the geologist has the evidence. The geologist thinks the biologists have the evidence. The other thing to remember is, when do people learn evolution? Normally, kids, dinosaur books, right? Before they're ever in school. And when you think about it, these 3 and 4-year-olds that are reading dinosaur books or having them read to them, and they're looking at the pictures and they're told that dinosaurs lived millions and millions of years before people ever evolved on the earth. And so these children are conditioned already to believe evolution all the way through school. And if you ask most of students, and I mean, ask your friends, ask your teachers, when did they learn evolution? And, we asked Dave's uncle that. He's a PhD endocrinologist. We asked him that. When did you learn evolution? He said, I guess I'd have to say in high school or first year of college. And then after that, it's always assumed as if it's true. And so even going into graduate school, you're building upon what you believe is already true, and you believe the evidence is there, and you don't necessarily go back to look at it. And I think most people that believe in evolution have never examined it the way they might examine something else in their special field of interest or study. And just, people are conditioned to believe it. That's all they're taught.
Now, you're hearing Mary Jo cough here and there, but you have to understand, I'm not worried about the COVID here, because every year for the last how many decades that we've been coming here, she comes to Minnesota, there's her Minnesota cough. She's been calling it. You don't know what's going on, but it always seems to.
I think I have an allergy from when I grew up in Mankato.
Okay, I said you're number 2 and then yours, okay?
I want, so the creation accounts is man was there with the animals on day 6, and then the flood took out everyone with all the creatures and man. Is there evidence for human fossils in the fossil layer?
That is a great question, okay? And I do remember, even when I was an evolutionist, and this sometimes happens, I found a human bone way down lower in the rock layer. I remember way back then, I just laughed at that potential. Okay, I didn't laugh in his face. But he said, I'll take you there someday. Oh, I said, okay. We never went. Okay, that's when I was back being an evolutionist. So sometimes it's ignored, okay? And other times, frequently, Some of these fossils are found in, when you listen to what they say, this one was caught in a flash flood. Some of the Australopithecine fossils, some of these other ones. Wait a minute, was that flash flood preserving humans as well as monkeys, etc.? So we do find possibly way down there. Keep in mind one thing, I'm going to show you a biblical answer. God said he was going to blot mankind off the face of the earth because of the wickedness. Okay? That's called erasing, okay? And it's a very good possibility that he really did that, all right? Now, near Moab, Utah, there was found reports of, and it's in the geologic literature, of somebody actually digging. They found a burial of a human skeleton in the very same layer that you normally found the dinosaur bone, the petrified dinosaur bone. And so, yeah, there is some kind of sometimes you find that. Now, think about our flesh. If we're in a flood environment, the flood is just not water. The flood moving currents we're going to have to look at. Nothing to stop the tsunami currents as well, okay? There's nothing that's going to stop those. And so what happens, it picks up a lot of debris, a lot of sand, a lot of silt, rocks. If we're caught in that kind of a flood, we will be, you might say, pulverized. Okay, we're not going to see very much left, especially of humans. Also, when mammals, and we are basically classified as mammals, when we drown, we bloat and float. Okay, we're not going to be buried deeply in those rock layers. We become very good white shark, great white shark meat, right? Etc. And so I think there's other controls going on there too. And the number of humans, probably a whole lot less than other type of creatures. When God created, he created the oceans, the teem with fish. How many humans did he create? 2. All right. 2. So we have a lot less population, say, of humans, and we do have all of these other billions of animals. Okay. And so what you see there is a good reason then to think they're going to be hard to find if they are. But the occasional one goes against the evolutionary rule. Let's put it that way.
What is it, something like 95% or more of fossils? I think I've heard even more.
It's
than
even a higher
95
percentage.
are marine fossils, things like clams and snails and so on, stuff that lived in the ocean, which now if you think about it from a flood perspective, those would be the environments that would be buried first. As a flood would come upon the land, and you'd have a lot of erosion coming off the land surface, burying those marine fossils, you know, as you erode that sediment off, and then gradually you get up through different layers. There are creationists who are geologists who are studying the impact of the flood and trying to reevaluate the rock layers in terms of pre-flood, you know, early flood, mid-flood, and post-flood, and doing some very interesting research in that way. You'll see some of that tomorrow night. You'll see evidence tomorrow night of massive layers of rock that were laid down, we believe, by the flood, and massive amounts of erosion also. So the flood can explain the rock layer, the deposition of layers, plus the erosion of those layers. And I do encourage you, come tomorrow if you possibly can. That's one of my favorite talks that we do is looking at the flood evidence.
You see the little diagram I just drew? Those are, let's suppose there are the rock layers, okay? They're rock layers. And now, all right, which order were those deposited in? Huh? Bottom layer first, correct? We all know that. This isn't part of my lecture tomorrow, but actually when water is coming into a basin, it's coming frequently this way. It's depositing this way. The bigger material is pushing this way. When it's all said and done, the layers are being formed, the strata is being formed this way, like that.
But
You
it
see that?
ends up being
Now
horizontal.
we
layers.
take a cross section and we look at this flat layer here. Even though it goes this way, because of the size and distribution of the water and the particles, this will all look like same layer. This one might look like a different layer, okay? You see that?
We have a video showing flume
This is-
experiments with
This
this.
one is actually last one put down. Okay, and you wouldn't think that, would you?
I'll
You
tell
would
you
think
what.
it was the first put down, like you answered.
You look at the video of that, it's called Fundamental Experiments in Stratification. They did it, I believe, was Colorado State University.
Yeah,
Flume.
by a French guy by the name of Guy Berthaud, okay? Guy
And he-
Berthaud, it's Fundamental Experiments in Stratification. You can look it up on YouTube
He
and
used,
you can see it in action
Yeah,
and how it works.
he used some dark and light materials that were of different densities. And you can see it in the flume and you can watch it actually depositing like this, just moving ahead like that. And when it comes out, it's all flat layers. And you watch it happen and you just can't hardly believe it's happening and you're seeing it with your very eyes, watching that deposition take place. So interesting when you have movement of water, what can actually take place.
Mhm.
You had a question.
And this all takes place sometimes in the matter of minutes.
Oh, yeah.
This could be all in minutes, not over millions of years. Your question back there, I promised him. What?
Just wanted to point out, sometimes people have to leave.
Okay, oh, yeah.
Sometimes people have to leave, but in case you're wondering, we are recording this and we're gonna post it online. So yesterday's presentation was already posted online yesterday, thanks to Dave and Josh, I think. So thanks, guys. So tonight it'll probably be posted again, the one for tonight. And that's at our church's website. So Spirit Formed, ED at the end, spiritformed.com. We have church flyers here. If you want to grab a flyer, it has a website on it. And there's a little YouTube link at the top. Click on that and then go to videos and you'll see the first video is going to be the latest. So you can check out the recordings if you want to review on what was covered here while doing that. So thanks.
And on our website, discovercreation.org, there are just hundreds of articles and there's some videos on there too. And our YouTube channel is Alpha Omega Institute and lots of more videos on there.
If you go to this site right here, /videos, you'll get to it. Okay, /videos.
So your question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when you're like initiating a conversation or like someone's curious or really understand, they could be a Christian, non-Christian. Is there a particular place you go first to just kind of help them understand it's by the Bible or just information or evidence that you kind of revert to first to just give them a simplified understanding?
I think, yeah, okay, the question was, where do you go first if you're trying to share your understanding of this creation stuff with somebody, whether or not they're a believer or not? Where do you go first? And I think we need to be really sensitive to the Spirit of God when we talk with people. Sometimes what they need is a piece of science or a whole bunch of evidence. Other times that's not really the issue. And so I don't have we don't have a canned way to approach people. We ask questions, find out where they're at, find out if they say they believe in evolution, you might ask why, what do they think is the evidence for evolution? Or a lot of times if people are rejecting the Bible or rejecting the creation account or just rejecting God and the Bible altogether, you might ask them why, because that gives you a clue where to go. Because a lot of times people are putting up a defense and they may think the evidence supports evolution. But that may be what and they may just need a little bit of evidence. Other times that becomes an excuse. And a lot of times, and I've had people tell me this, they don't want to believe in creation because then they have to believe in a creator. And then that means they're accountable to a creator.
Yeah.
And, I've had a few people that were honest enough to say that. Usually they don't tell you that in so many words. Usually they'll have another excuse, or, all the scientists can't be wrong. They'll tell you, or, you guys are crazy or nuts or whatever. But I think it's just very important to find out where people are at.
Think about it too. If I just came up to you or to most students on the university campus and told them, did you know that the whale evolution is not true? They say, you're crazy. I saw these things have the pictures that way back when, right? And that's what they teach you in the class, and they'll give you a couple of examples, and wow, they think you're crazy if you don't believe in that, right? So it's a interesting thing, and they might call you crazy. They might call you all kinds of names. That's okay. I have tough skin. Okay.
For those of you that are Christians tonight, or you're believers in the Bible, and you study the life of Jesus and see how he dealt with each individual according to the needs of that individual, and he was led by the Spirit of God his whole life on earth. And walked on this earth empowered by the Spirit, and so, and in communion with his heavenly Father, he prayed. And I think for us, a lot of what we do involves just being sensitive to where God is leading the conversation, and we're not there to try to push things into where people are at. Find out what the questions are, and you may not have the answer. I mean, maybe they've got a scientific question and you don't have the answer. Well, you can get on our website and you can look. You can go to icr.org or creation.com, or there's a variety of
just go to
sites.
ours, and it takes you to 6 different.
Yeah, we have.
It's not just, we're not proprietary, okay? And so you look for something, we will send you to other sites too. So if we don't have an article on it, you can click on search other creation sites, get the answer, okay? Perhaps.
Yeah, so what, I came late, so maybe I missed it, but what first turned, you were evolutionists, right? Both of you?
Yes.
So what was the initial spark that made you doubt that or question that or turn?
The fossil
maybe you already
record.
That little book he showed you, that's Evolution, the Fossils Say No.
Started us thinking and
That's
said
what-
we have to do our own research.
That got us going
You
because
just thought that you-
I found it in a secondhand store for 5 cents. And I bought it just because it looked interesting. I mean, I was teaching biology and I go, wait a minute, I thought the fossils proved evolution. What's this guy talking about?
And at that time, we were teaching college up in Alaska at a small college up there. And so I was happy with my evolution. I had no problems with it until wait a minute, started researching it.
Yeah, and so, once it's very interesting because most students are so involved with, papers and studies and tests and everything else. They don't have time to do any outside research. I know I used to get so frustrated because I'd be studying something and I wanted to go pursue something and there was no time. You just had to feed in as much as you could feed in and feed it back out on tests fast as you could do it practically. And so you really start learning is when you're out of school.
Really?
when you have some time to start looking at things for yourself. And now I wouldn't want you to use that as an excuse. I would say, go ahead and study some other,
Oh, yeah.
try to pursue some things.
Go ahead, just follow it.
So did that lead you to faith, like creation, like you learned about creation first and then you became a Christian, or were you already a Christian?
Well, we were already believers.
Okay.
I grew up in a Christian home and I believed in Jesus, you know, as a child. And, yeah. And
But I
so,
didn't grow up in a
but he
Christian
did
home.
not. He grew up in an unbelieving home. And in fact, his dad was against creation and against the Bible. And somebody led him to the Lord early on.
97.
Well, no, you in your college days.
Oh, me, yeah, in my college days, but I just drug evolution along with me. I thought evolution was a fact, so I was content in my believing that God used evolution as his method of creating until I started finding out the evidence did not support that scientifically, and neither did the biblical records support that.
And
Okay.
I was taught that idea at a church college, that God used evolution, that Genesis was a myth. It was a story written for primitive people who couldn't understand the science of evolution. You know, the days were roughly parallel to the epochs of time and so on.
Mhm.
But yeah, and so we kind of kept the, you know, whatever evolution we believed in, we brought it along with us. And then we started to look and find out there were so many contradictions that, yeah.
Yeah, real quick, just to comment on that too. I'm a pastor, for those of you that weren't here at the beginning. I introduced myself, Maranatha Church. Maybe you
Go ahead and
guys-
speak a little closer to this.
Yeah, but yeah, I think what you'll find with creationists is, in my opinion, most of them came to this perspective because they were Christians first, right? So it's out of relationship with Jesus that opened them up to this possibility and begin to see the world that way. And so you know, it's the gospel that saves. It's not creationism, right? So it's talking about Jesus that's going to awaken someone, right? And what his message. So a lot of what we do is to equip Christians to not concede ground on this area and on the area of the Bible. So a lot of our motivation is just simply for that purpose, that you at a minimum can just simply with confidence say, I don't believe in evolution. No, I believe what the God who's powerful enough said he did it in 6 days. And I believe what the Bible says, you know. And as a matter of fact, that you're just confident that's all you say, and then you preach the gospel, right? And when someone comes around to that faith, right, that then there's a little bit more. I think a lot of this has to do with discipleship, has to do with equipping other Christians to believe their Bible and to stand their ground, you know. So that's kind of my thoughts on the issue.
Not always the case, though. We've talked to people who were not believers, and the scientific evidence gave them the interest to at least check out what the Bible had to say. We had a student in Alaska who is a great kid, great student. We had a good time with him, you know, and Dave and he would go out fishing or hiking or something and hunting and whatever, and they'd talk about all kinds of things.
Yep.
But if Dave got close to anything spiritual, the student would just go, no way, and he'd close up. And finally one day he said, Dave, I can't buy this Jesus stuff. Dave said, why not? And he said, because evolution is a fact. That means Genesis is false. He said, if God can't get the first book of the Bible right, why would I believe anything else he has to say? Which is a really good point. I mean, if the author is lying on page 1, why do you listen to anything else, really?
Right.
Well, the student, his name was Jeff, he came to a lecture series that was done by Dr. Henry Morris from the Institute for Creation Research. We had Dr. Morris come to our little school up in Alaska there, and he gave a series of lectures. Yeah, he used to be a professor here at the U of M
Yeah,
years
he
ago.
was.
In the
In
late
hydrology,
40s or something. He wrote a textbook on hydrology that was used in
graduate school.
graduate school all over the country. But anyway, after Jeff came and heard Dr. Morris, he said, if evolution isn't true, that doesn't leave much, does it? He said, I better start doing some thinking. And within a couple months after that, he became a believer, a Christian.
He started doing
Because-
his own research.
Because what the evidence, the scientific evidence showed him that evolution was not a proven scientific fact, and that gave him the impetus to go ahead and study scripture and And to be able to understand from the Bible, creation lays a foundation, that God is the creator, and that we as human beings have rebelled against our creator, and that we need a savior. We can't save ourselves. And that perspective that Jeff was able to gain from that gave him the, opened his heart to where he could receive the gospel message. And he's not the only one. We've seen lots and lots of students or others come to the Lord that way. Yeah, one more and then we'll take yours.
Oh, really quick. So were you able to teach creation at your Alaskan school or not?
Yeah, we did, because
Secular school?
it was a church-related school.
Oh, so
But when we went up
Right.
there, the whole biology department was evolutionary, the whole science department was, and nobody cared that we taught evolution, even though it was a church school. And after we came around, several of the other professors up there did too. Not all of them, but some of them did. So, yeah.
So I guess I was just curious. I noticed that you guys said fine a lot when referring to animals and whatnot, but you didn't use species at all.
Mhm.
So I was just wondering what you guys consider the difference.
Yeah.
is for that.
Okay, the questions about, we used the term kinds and didn't really talk about species too much. First of all, it's important to realize that the whole classification system, the taxonomic classification system is human. I mean, it's man-made, right? People have come up with a classification system. The original taxonomic systems, classification systems that were come about were based a lot on outside observations of similarities that you could see that would group similar animals together, like the dogs, together under Canis and so on. And so those systems were originated by human beings. Over time, instead of grouping things so much by the exterior appearances and so on, people started to put things into the classification schemes according to their supposed evolutionary ancestry. And I'm going, well, okay, you can put them in there that way, but then they turn around and try to use that classification scheme to say these things are related because they're the same genus or the same whatever, and you're looking at it and going, that's kind of circular reasoning, to build your classification scheme based on supposed evolutionary ancestry and then turn around and try to prove that things are related that way. Species, and I think what you're getting at is, what is a kind and how does it relate to a species? In general, we believe that the kinds are broader categories than species. So maybe up at the family level, even for some things. In the plants, seems more like at the genus level. But what is a species anyway? You get taxonomists together and they can't agree on which, is this a new species or isn't it? There's a lot of battles that go on in that area, just trying to decide. And so it seems like in the animal kingdom, it seems to be a little higher categories up, although not always. There's a group of creation scientists now who are working on this problem, and they're looking at something called a bara mean. Bara is a Hebrew word meaning created or create, and min, M-I-N, means kind. And so the created kinds, what were those original created kinds? That would be amazing to be able to decipher those. And so they're looking at that whole system of how can we look at the current classification system. Does it accurately reflect what we see in nature, or should we look at other ways to understand what these kinds are? So I would just say that we have really a historical kind of definition for a kind then. There's the originally created groupings that the creator made during the creation period. And so, can we work backwards to try to find out what those kinds were? I think hopefully to some extent we might be able to, and it may come about because of genetic studies more than looking at exterior characteristics. And so it's a fascinating area. It's an area of ongoing research for creationists.
Another question.
Yeah, if any of you are biologists and want to tackle some of that kind of research, it'd be amazing. We need more creation scientists around, really. And I think what's happened is a lot of times believers, Christians, shy away from some of the sciences because they don't want to get stuck in the evolutionary research mode, you know? And yet we have lots to offer, and there's a lot of research going on today by people who are creationists, who are Bible believers, and they're doing very good research. But people will sometimes say, well, then why isn't it published in the standard journals? And it's because things have to go through peer-reviewed process in the standard journals. And oftentimes, if your conclusions even point to something that looks like creation, they won't publish them. And so there are some creationist journals, technical journals, where they're putting out good scientific research. There's some technical conferences where people are able to present their papers.
Peer-reviewed
Yeah,
papers, by the
peer-reviewed
way.
papers by others who
Okay.
are doing work in the area.
And by the way, Mary Schweitzer, who I mentioned with the soft tissue and dinosaur, she was at times, she was an evolutionist. I believe she still is, okay?
Mhm.
But she saw the soft tissue. And even as an evolutionist, she couldn't get her paper published because it went against the prevailing thought, okay? And so, boy, that was quite a long time ago. Not that long ago, I guess. But
Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up,
yeah,
right?
that's what happened.
That's a question about the dinosaur tissue. Can you tell based on the soft tissue about the age of a dinosaur? Like based on like the decomposition, like
Okay.
how long it takes to decompose, or is that a possibility, or is that really hard to tell?
It is hard to tell the age. Generally, what they would do is try to date the volcanic layer that it's found in. And many of
Some
these,
in the middle, it's-
yeah, it seemed like it was working better here. Many of those particular fossils are found in a lot of volcanic ashes. And so they say, oh, we can date that. They use potassium argon dating. And the problem is with potassium argon dating, when it's been used on, and many of these other dating methods, when it's used on layers that they know the age of, they knew when it occurred, like Mount St. Helens erupted 1980, okay? A recent volcanic lava dome built up 30 years later. So they decided to take a date on that recent volcanic lava dome when it cooled. They ended up with dates of 340,000 years old minimum, up to 2.8 million years. Then they found out the same thing happened in New Zealand, Grand Canyon. The layer there, the recent volcanic lava flow, was dated at least as old and up to twice as old as the rock layers underneath the entire canyon. And so when we actually use the, what?
You started with New Zealand and then you moved to the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, right. There are three different areas that they were doing research on. One was Mount St. Helens, then in New Zealand, then now in even Hawaii. I'll get the fourth one. Now Hawaii as well. They ended up with knowing when that volcanic eruption and the lava flow, and the dates they got there, minimum was 2 million years old, and then up to 1 billion. Okay,
And you understand he's talking
they just
about-
happened. So something's
Right, they
wrong with
just
those
happened.
dating
Right.
methods.
Yes.
The Grand Canyon, the recent rock layers, the volcanic flow, dated as older as the rock, older than the rock layers underneath the canyon. And so that makes them suspect. And so can you date a fossil directly? Most cases, no, because there's no carbon or there's nothing in there to tell you. So you do the layer. Although now they've actually dated certain things that with carbon-14 dating. Now, dinosaur bone can be dated with carbon-14 because when you look at the cellular structure preserved in the rock, you got the agate center, but then you have this wall, the cell wall, still has carbon in it. Okay, and so you can date that. by carbon-14. It shouldn't have any radioactive carbon in it because the half-life of radiocarbon is so short. Shouldn't have any, so nobody even thought about dating it. But they decided, well, let's try it. Okay, and they took a huge number of samples and they ended up with significant amounts of carbon-14, and it was not contamination. Okay, and that allowed only dates of thousands of years, not millions. Interesting. They did the same thing with coal layers, supposedly 300 million years old, thousands of years. And they said, oh, maybe there's groundwater seeping through. All right, so we're going to look at that. Okay, what's one substance that has carbon in it the groundwater can't get through? Diamonds. Pure carbon.
Can you carbon 14 date diamonds?
Yeah, they're supposed to be ancient, right? They ground up a bunch of them. Yeah, basically, they found significant amounts of carbon-14 in diamonds and thousands,
Shouldn't be
millions
in.
of years.
If
And
they're
so,
old.
when you look at that, that's the only way to directly date dinosaur bone. And they're not getting the hoped for results. I'm going to say hoped for because they suspected that there shouldn't be any in there. Okay, so
But the point of view, fossils are usually dated by the layers they're found in. And then they date the layers by the fossils found in them. It is very circular. When did they do that? Oh, within the last 20 years, probably.
yeah, it's been in them
I think.
definitely, maybe even 12 years. When was it? Yeah,
I don't know. It's been more recent. Yeah.
yeah.
You know,
It was called the RATE project, RATE, RATE project. And that's where they reported that.
It's interesting that I believe I think it may be illegal to teach creation in science class in the United States. Like they'll allow intelligent design, but you can't actually give credit to God or a creator.
That's true.
Only intelligent design is allowed in the schools. You can't, as soon as you talk about God, it's illegal. So we've legally ruled out any possibility but a naturalistic explanation within science, even though you see a presentation like tonight and you see there should be allowed alternative explanations because all the things we're taught are true. We're not giving the whole story. A lot of these things aren't even true anymore. You know, they never were true. We're mistaken, you know, or hoaxes and things like that. But PhDs in science, you can't get your PhD if you don't believe in evolution. The people that are the one who are going to determine whether you get it, you have to pass the evolutionary test or you will be denied your PhD. And so they say, well, where's the PhD people? Where's this peer reviewed amongst the PhDs for your creation science paper? It's like, well, you won't even allow creationists to be PhDs, you know, and to get tenured as a professor, you know, how hard is it to get tenured as a professor if you're a creationist? So the establishment has really restricted anything but naturalism and evolution to be in education. Dave himself was fired from his position as in a statistics class as a math teacher for teaching that the probability that life came from non-life is statistically zero based on that, just doing a math formula. He didn't actually mention Jesus or God or the Bible, but they got mad and he got fired. You know, so they really want control over what you're going to believe, that you're not going to believe in a creator. You're not going to believe in a savior. You know, it is, the Bible says there's suppression of the truth in unrighteousness in Romans chapter 1. Says that what can be known about God is plain to us. God has made it plain. For since the beginning of creation, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, his divine nature can be seen through what has been made, so that we are without excuse. So the natural world should point us, all these amazing things should point us to a personal, all-powerful, eternal, supernatural being. That's the origin of the world we live in and of ourselves. And yet, but from little kids, we're taught, hey, you know, evolution, pictures and museums, textbooks, you know, national parks, you know, on TV, everything, evolution, evolution, evolution. And so for me personally, it took me about 16 years of these presentations before I was deprogrammed from thinking evolution, evolution, evolution. And yet I was a Christian and became a believer in creation. But it was like, it's
It
taken
takes
me a
time.
long time of deprogramming, because you're taught so much, people, so I'll be done with my soapbox, but just wanted to, make us all think.
Yeah, and technically, it's not illegal to teach creation. It's the interpretation that says separation of church and state, which according to the founders was not meant to say you can't teach creation or even the Bible in schools. But what it originally was is this country was not established to have a state religion like England had the Church of England or other nations where they had an endorsed church, that, and we don't have that. But it was not meant originally to exclude God from the classroom or exclude the Bible from the classroom. Early American education was based on the Bible. And so I think that's also what's happened a lot. And about, having to be deprogrammed. I remember after we had become creationists, we still weren't convinced about the age of the earth issues. And we had a pastor up in Alaska who happened to be from Western Colorado, where we live now. And he said, don't you just see evidence of the flood all over Western Colorado? Well, we were polite. We didn't laugh in his face, but we went home and we laughed, and we thought that was really ridiculous that he believed in the flood and the ark and all of that. Next time we got back to Western Colorado, we went out on the desert and we looked at these rock layers that he was referring to, and everywhere we looked, we saw evidence of flood. And it's like those optical illusions, where you look at things one way and all of a sudden it'll bounce and you'll see it a different way, the box or something like that, and it is because we had been so programmed to look at rock layers and think millions of years. Our whole education had programmed us to see things that way. And once we opened the door to the possibility of evidence of a flood, then we began to see things we would never have seen otherwise. And I think about particular fossils that were found in the red wall limestone, nautiloid fossils, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of these nautiloid fossils in the red wall limestone in the Grand Canyon.
We think.
Oh, they look like
long cigars. Okay.
And they found the creationists were doing research and discovered these fossils. And the evolutionists at the park said, why haven't we seen them? And basically the answer was, you weren't looking for them. You've already ruled them out, so you're not going to see them. And I think with anything in our life, that's the way things are. We need to be open to see, what does the evidence really say? And maybe, one of the things I feel like is because we were on the other side of the debate for a long time, we're better able to at least evaluate our own biases. We understand we're biased. We know we are. Everybody's biased, but once which bias is the best bias to be biased with? Which one fits the facts best? Which one seems to explain the conditions that we see on Earth, and which explains the condition of the human heart and so on, and the needs that we find within ourselves. And I think that, we tell people, try to get out of your box and start seeing, at least evaluating things to see if what we're saying is true. Because so often people are just, if you've learned something like this, you've got blinders on. And so first thing to do is to start evaluating your own worldview and find out, what worldview am I operating under? And a lot of people don't even believe they have a worldview. They just think their view is
The only way.
the only way. And they've never really examined it. They've just absorbed it throughout their life, coming up through school and so on. So real important to take time and examine, why do I believe what I believe? Any other questions?
Yeah, I do want to say this. Any other questions?
Okay.
it's amazing what the pressure of the people around you, how that affects
Peer pressure.
whether you'll be willing to stand up and defend something, to believe something, you know. So people are very offended or embarrassed about this subject, right? So I'm out on campus today with a whiteboard. Maybe you saw me, maybe you didn't, but I have, you know, evolution is false, change my mind. You know, that's my whiteboard. It's just to get people to defend evolution, to argue these evidences that we're going to see tonight. And then maybe if they can, if through that conversation they can see that they don't have a stronger foundation as they thought they did, then maybe they'd be open to coming, you know. But I told a lot of people, I said, hey, you know, we got this presentation tonight, you know, we're going to talk about all these the refutations of these so-called evidences that you're actually giving to me as examples. We actually talked about, I probably had 4 conversations that we addressed tonight. And I told them, we're going to address it tonight. I'm not the expert, I'm not the speaker, but we're going to address it tonight. I hope you'll come. Absolutely, they would not come, right? There's no way, this is ridiculous. I'm embarrassed. I'll never be there, you know? So commend you guys for coming. And, you know, there's a verse in the Bible, John 5, verse 44, where Jesus said, how can you believe? Because you accept praise from one another, but refuse to live for the praise that comes from the one true God. So we fear man, and we are embarrassed, and we hide our light. We're ashamed of Christ because we look like a fool. And so we are influenced to basically into unbelief through embarrassment and peer pressure. So let's not be embarrassed of our Bible. Let's just be loud and proud. And just say, you know, hey, you know, Jesus is real, and you know, there's evidence for it, and I'm not ashamed. Why did Paul have to say, I'm not ashamed of the gospel? Obviously, someone was trying to shame him, and he was responding to that. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. So there's a lot of shame put on us for whatever we believe, whether it's in a Savior who rose from the dead, or virgin born, or you believe in a creation in 6 days, you know. And so just want to encourage you guys not to. Thank you for being here, and don't let the peer pressure or the shaming stop you from believing and for standing up. You know, there's times when I've stood up for the faith, and my palms were sweaty, and my hands were shaking, and I didn't even want to hold something because someone would see I was shaking, and you know, said things wrong, made mistakes, but I believe the Holy Spirit was pleased that I was willing to stand up, and I learned through that courage to get more confident, and it wasn't as hard the next time. And you know, as Christians, we just stand up, you know, for what we believe. You know,
There's been a lot of psychological experiments done on peer pressure and group thinking. Very interesting. I just saw one today, actually, online, and they had in a doctor's office waiting room. They had set it up so several of the people in there were already conditioned to do something when they heard like a beep, and they would all stand up. And there was this one young lady sitting over there, and she's looking around and looking like they're crazy, you know. Well, then beep, and they all stood up again, and she's still sitting there. And finally, she decided to stand up with the group. She had no idea why, but she stood up with the group. And eventually, they took these people out one by one to the doctor's office, and she's sitting there by herself. And it went beep, and she stood up, even though she's all alone. A couple more people came in, and goes beep, and she stands up, and the guy's looking at her crazy, and after a few times he stands up too. But it's just showing we're all sheep. We really, you know, you really have to examine, what do you believe and why do you believe it, and are you willing to stand on it? And especially when it comes to areas of faith and so on, are we willing to stand for what we believe? But,
Well, thank you so much for coming out tonight, and talk to us individually if you want to have more questions. Glad to talk to you. Thank you. David's gonna turn this off right now, right?
and David Murray Joe will also be at our church on Saturday night.
Oh, that's
So,
right.
The next presentation is tomorrow night here, and then on Saturday night they'll be at our church speaking on creation evidences at Yellowstone National Park.
yeah,
That's
virtual.
at 7
Flyers on the
o'clock.
table, you're all
That's at
invited.
7 o'clock over here.
Mhm.
Fun presentation.
Where did you put your mask? Is that one mine?
I think this is yours. Mine was sitting here. But it was already folded.
Mine was folded.
Well, you better.
I don't want yours, never mind.